Filing like a pro. My name is Nick O, and over the course of the next 30 or 40 minutes, we're going to discuss some of the features of AQtime Pro. I'm sure that many of you out there have seen AQtime Standard, which is bundled with RAD Studio XE, but AQtime Pro has a bunch of additional useful functionality that we're going to be highlighting today. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get rolling. As Mike said, this webinar is being recorded, and you'll be receiving a link to that webinar later on. And second, there will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. We'll try and field some questions real time as well if we can, but rest assured if you do ask a question, we will be getting to it toward the end of the session. So now, today we're going to cover a handful of topics. For starters, we're going to search for memory leaks within our application and clean those up. Then we'll do some performance profiling and make our code run faster. Then I'll show you how you can get automatic code coverage numbers by combining AQtime with Test Complete, our automated testing tool. And finally, I'll show you how you can have your entire build, test, and profiling process automated by combining Test Complete and AQtime with another one of our products called Automated Build Studio. All right, so we have a lot of ground to cover today, so let's dive right in. For the memory profiling and performance portions of today's session, we're going to use a sample application called Night Tours. And what this application does is determine how many moves this knight would need to make in order to land on every square in the grid. So, quick refresher on how knights move on a chessboard. Knights move in this L pattern. So one of our first possible moves would be to go from the initial square to this square here in the second row. And then we could move from that square in the second row back up to the last square in the top row. And we keep moving like that until our knight has landed on every square in the grid. All right, let's do some profiling of this application. I'm going to jump out of PowerPoint right now. I'm going to go right into RAD Studio here. And the first thing we want to do is profile our application for memory leaks. Now, AQtime Pro integrates directly into the Embarcadero Studio IDE, just like AQtime Standard does. So what I'm going to do is come up here to the AQtime menu. I'm going to go to the current profiler section, and I'm going to choose Allocation Profiler, because that's going to allow me to check for memory leaks. I'm also going to enable another AQtime panel, which will help me traverse my results a little more easily once they're generated. And to do that, I'm going to come here to the View panel. I'm going to go down to AQtime Profile Windows. And I'm going to open up this Explorer panel. I'm just going to dock that right over here. Okay, so now I'm ready to start profiling. So I'll start that just by coming up here to the AQtime menu one more time, and we'll say Run with Profiling. And now AQtime compiles my application, and it brings up some run settings for my profiler here. I'm going to keep the defaults right now. Just going to say Run. And oh, it looks like I picked the wrong profiler here. Let me cancel out of this and switch to the allocate. There we go. Okay. All right. Minor hiccup there. No problem. Okay, so now we're going to run with profiling. Again, my application gets compiled. We get some run settings generated here. And I'm just going to keep the defaults for right now. And I'm going to click this Run button. So now AQtime launches my application. And what I'm going to do right now is click this Start button that you see right here, which will have the Night Tour application begin calculating its moves. I'm going to let this run for about 10 seconds. And what you're seeing as the image is flashed by on the screen is all the patterns and move combinations that we could make to get our knight to touch every square in the grid. And after 10 seconds, you can see that we came up with 49 different ways that we could fill that grid. So I'm going to stop the profiling just by closing my application down now. And AQtime generates a report of all the objects that were placed in memory during the course of our profiling session and the size of those objects, as you can see right here. Now, what I want to do is determine if there were any instances of these objects left in memory after I closed my application down. And the way I'm going to do that is by double-clicking on this Classes Data node right here in the results. And what you want to pay attention to is this live count column right here. And what you can see is that we have some objects that were left in memory. For example, I have 2 instances of this T-bitmap image and another 2 instances of T-bitmap, and so on and so forth. So I have a bunch of objects that have been left in memory after my app shut down. So that's bad. So we want to figure out what functions called those or created those objects and didn't destroy them properly. So the way we can do that, we're going to enable another panel here. I'm going to go up to the View menu. I'm going to go to AQtime Profile Windows, and I'm going to go to this Details panel. I'm just going to drag this guy down here and dock him at the bottom portion of my screen, right there. Okay, so I can see that I've got 2 instances of a t-bitmap image left in memory. I'm going to double-click on the objects here, and I'm going to find one of those t-bitmap images. Okay, so I can see that right here. And now, when I come down to this details pane, I can see the creation call stack, every function that led up to the creation of this particular object. So it goes from most recent being the one that actually created the object, to very down at the end where the application actually got invoked. So I'm going to just come down through here until I find an instance where my application starts actually building that object. I'm going to just double click on this board paint node right here. And what that's going to do is take me right into the function directly from this panel. So I double click here and it takes me right inside the source code. Now, in looking through this source code, what I'm going to find is that my application is not properly cleaning up after itself. You know, if we spent some time debugging the code, we'd find that it actually didn't destroy things properly. So what I'm going to do is just jump down to a section here. And what you'll see is here's our board where we're actually painting all the information inside that grid. And what we're finding is that some stuff inside of our destructor has been commented out. And so we have a problem here. That's not cleaning up after itself properly. So what we're going to do is just toggle that comment off so that we will actually clean up after ourselves. And once that's done, come back up here and we'll run with profiling one more time. Again, I'll keep the default settings. And this time around, we'll run for another 10 seconds. And as it does that, I would like to mention that AQtime can also work with C++ applications as well as Delphi Prism.NET apps and other Microsoft and Java-based applications. So you're not limited to just profiling one language. All right, now our application is finished profiling. Let's go ahead and close this down. And this time around, when we come into the objects palette, you can see it's blank. So that means that there are no objects left in memory after that particular run was complete. So we've cleaned up that memory leak inside our application. Okay, now we've got our information. We've verified that we had a problem, and now we don't have a problem anymore. You can see here on the live count column, that's 0 everywhere going on. So what we may want to do is export these results and save them off as an artifact for our development process. Maybe we want to say, hey, after I made this improvement, there are no live objects, and you want to document that either in your source control system or in your ALM solution or what have you. AQtime allows you to export your results simply by right-clicking here and saying Save to File. And that will allow you to take your results, save them off as an AQR file, which is just a binary that AQtime can read later, and that way you keep your results for posterity and you can share them with other members of your team. Okay, so now we've talked about how we can do memory leak profiling. Let's talk about performance profiling. We want to figure out where the slow spots are in our application. In fact, we want to know exactly which lines within our application are poor performers. And AQtime Pro allows you to get down at the line level and see exactly which lines of your source code are the ones who are causing bottlenecks. So let's do that right now. I'm going to come back up here to the AQtime menu, and I'm going to change my profiler to the performance profiler. Okay, and now you can see right here I've got set by lines, so I will profile down at the line level, and we'll just start profiling the application again. And we'll just say run with profiling. Okay, now one thing I want to mention here is that AQtime Pro provides additional counters here in the active counter session. This allows you to specify how AQtime is going to time your code's performance. For example, the default, which you're all used to from AQtime Standard, is elapsed time, and that just measures the time spent from the entrance and the exit of a function. User time, though, as you'll see down here, user time includes the time spent, only tracks the time spent in user mode. That is, it doesn't track time spent executing code in the kernel. It doesn't track time spent switching between threads. So it's just actually your pure function time itself. And then you have context switches up here, and those allow you to see if one particular thread is monopolizing the CPU, which could lead to performance problems. Or it could tell you that too many context switches are happening, and that's causing performance problems. So you've got a whole bunch of different mechanisms that you can use to time how your application is performing. And there's a full explanation of each one of these counters that you can review just by clicking on the Help button right here. All right, so we've got our profiler set up. I'm going to click Run. And now we get a couple of dialogues here that will be shown, and these will tell us some other information like, okay, there's no line info found for these particular routines. That's not something I'm worried about right now, so I'm going to click OK. And I'll also get another message saying that a couple of routines couldn't be instrumented, and the reasons for that are listed right here in this reason column. Again, nothing here looks really bothersome to me, so I'm just going to take that and click OK. All right, now, again, what we're going to do is just click the Start button inside our application to start profiling. And while it does that, I'd like to mention that AQtime can also run on all versions of Windows and can profile both 32-bit and 64-bit applications. So no matter what type of environment you're working with, AQtime will be able to profile your code. All right, so we've run for 10 seconds. I've clicked Stop, and now we'll click the Close button. And now AQtime is going to generate my results. All right, now, in reviewing these results, what we can see here is that one of our slow-performing functions is this guy right here. It's, excuse me, board paint. And there it is, board paint. Now, we want to find out exactly what about board paint is taking so long. So what I'm going to do is double-click on board paint. And now you can see here, there's our board paint procedure. And then here is the line-level profiling information for each line of code inside this function. And by hovering over one of these in the gutter, you can see exactly how many times the function got hit, if there were any exceptions, the amount of time in seconds that was spent on this particular line of code, the time with children, meaning if this line of code calls out to another line of code, we'd see that here. And then we also see the percent of time spent inside that particular function. You also see right here we've got this color coding attached to each one of these lines. And the closer you get to red, the poorer the performance is for that particular line. So right here, you know, these lines, white, 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 okay, no problem. But then this guy right here, line 571, he's a poor performer. And if we were to analyze this code, if you were to spend some time looking this over, what you'd find is that we are redrawing the entire grid every time we make a move on that chessboard. Now, complete redrawing might be useful when the application window gets resized, but it's certainly not necessary when the application only needs to put that knight icon in a new cell. So what we want to do is refactor that code so that it makes a little more intelligent decisions in terms of when it redraws the board. Now, for brevity's sake, what I'm going to do is just uncomment a line right here that will introduce some code that I've already written and thus make the application perform faster. So now we'll see how AQtime measures that. So we'll come back up here, and again we'll say run with profiling. I'm going to keep the same settings that I had last time around, and I'm going to just acknowledge those dialog boxes that we did previous time. Okay, so here we go. And I'm going to click the Start button. We'll let that go for 10 seconds. And while it does that, I'd like to mention that AQtime can also profile more than just GUI-based applications like what we're doing right now. It can also profile services, ASP.NET pages, and COM objects. So you can get down under the hood in a lot of cases as well as profiling your UI. All right, so we've got our 10 seconds worth of results. So now let's close the application down and see if the new code actually improves performance. Okay, so now we're looking for our board paint function, and I'm going to just sort by name here so I can find that. And there it is, board paint right there. I'm looking at this, and I think this is faster, but I'm not entirely sure. So here's another great feature about AQtime Pro, is that it allows you to automatically compare results from two different runs. So I'm going to select the two runs that I just did, and then I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to say Compare. And that invokes this Compare Settings dialog. And what this allows me to do is choose what information I'd like to compare between the two runs. All the columns that you see going across the top of my screen are listed here. So I can pick any one of these that I want. And in my case, I'm going to use percent time and percent time with children. And I've got my different style specified here. And what this does is this is going to show exactly how much faster this code ran as a percent. So we'll see if we're 5 times faster, maybe 20% faster, or so on. Okay, so we've made that selection, and I'm also going to include the routine name as just an information column so I can kind of easily track exactly what's being compared. So we'll say OK. All right, and now here we go. Here are the results. Here's what it looked like in the percent time column. Oh, didn't mean to zoom. I want to do this actually. Here's the percent time. So we're going to see exactly how much time is different here. And in the board paint section, what you can see is that previously we were spending 0.04% of our time inside that function, and now we're spending none of our time in that function, meaning that it's so small now that it can't even be registered. But now here's the real cool part. Come over here. Look at the percent with children that's happening. Previously, we were spending 15.23% of our time there. Now we're spending 0.34% of our time there. Less than 0.5% of our time is now being spent on this function, as opposed to 15% of our time. So that means that we have a performance improvement of over 4,000% just by tweaking this code. And that's how fast we were able to find the bottleneck and figure out how to fix it using AQtime. And now AQtime Pro makes it very easy for us to see just how much we've improved our results. So there's no ambiguity about, well, yeah, we made a tweak, I think it's faster, or yeah, it is faster, but I can't say how much. AQtime Pro allows you to just compare those results automatically and see exactly how much you've improved your code. All right, so now we've talked about memory and performance profiling with AQtime. The next thing I want to talk about is how AQtime can be used to automatically generate code coverage information by using AQtime in conjunction with Test Complete, which is our automated testing tool. And I'm going to use a different application for demo purposes in this section. This is a little orders tracking application that's written in Delphi, and this application has a bunch of features. It has the ability to place new orders in the system just by going to new order. You can edit a client's order. You can also generate lists of the customers that live inside your system, that sort of thing. So I've already got a Test Complete project created here, and what I'm going to do is just load that project up. And I'm going to walk you through the process of creating tests inside a Test Complete, running those tests, and then tying those tests up with AQtime. So I've got one test already created here. This is a test that's going to edit a user's order. But now what I want to do is record a test that's going to place a new order in my system. So what I'm going to do is just make a couple of tweaks to my project real quick here, and then we'll start the recording process just by clicking on this record button that you see right here. And now Test Complete will automatically invoke my application. Here it is. And now it's tracking every action that I perform on my system. So every keystroke that I perform, every button that I click, every bit of text that I type, Test Complete is tracking. So I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to say orders, new order. And let's place an order. Let's say that we want to order the family album product, and we want 3 of those. We'll put in a customer name, good old Barry Allen, and we'll give Barry a street. We'll say 1 My Street, and we'll give him a state. Put in New Hampshire there. We'll give him a credit card number of 9, and then we'll click OK. Now this should cause a problem because we haven't completed all of our required fields. There we go. We see that blank date is not a valid date, so I'm just going to say OK to that. I'm not going to bother fixing it. I'm going to close the application down. Okay, now what Test Complete will do is process all those actions that I just performed, and it's going to render those as a test case. And we refer to these test cases as keyword tests because they're very graphical in nature, and they're helpful for folks who don't have programming experience to easily follow along with what a particular test is doing. And what you can see here is we've got a very nice, concise instance of everything that's happening. We start out by loading our application, which you see right here. Then we choose the family item product from our drop-down list. We enter our username, his address, and write down the line. So now what I want to do, now that I've got this test created, is when this test runs, I want AQtime to tell me exactly how much of my code was profiled as a result of this test. So what we do there is we double-click on this Tested Apps section here in the project. And this shows me the path to my application. And what we want to set here is this run mode. And run mode has a couple of different flags. Simple means that the application will just be launched exactly as if an end user was double-clicking its shortcut. What we care about right now is this profile setting. And what that does, when I click on this parameters column, is that allows us to specify a profiler that will be called from AQtime and will be used during the course of the test. And you can just specify a profile in raw fashion here, or you can do like what I've done and specify a pre-existing AQtime project. So I've already created a project that's going to profile the code coverage down at the line level. So I'm going to know exactly how many lines of my code were covered by this test. So I'll click OK to this. I'm going to save my project. And then I'm going to come back over here into my test case, and I'm just going to click this Run Test button. All right, now I'm going to take my hands away from the keyboard and the mouse. Test Complete is now driving the system, and it's going to automatically invoke AQtime to perform the profiling, and then it will automatically invoke my tested application so that we don't need to worry about having a shortcut or anything like that. And here we go. Now Test Complete's driving the system. And while Test Complete does this, I'd love to mention that Test Complete also runs on all the same environments that AQtime does, and it also supports 32-bit and 64-bit applications as well. So there's no discrepancies there. There's no environments that Test Complete can do that AQtime can't. You'll always be able to test and profile your applications in conjunction very nicely. Okay, so now that our test is finished out, we've got two sets of results here. The first set of results is from within Test Complete itself. And what you can see here is that we've got this check mark here, which is telling us that the test was successful. And if you come down here to this information palette, you can see the total number of errors and warnings, along with the runtime that took place during this session. So we can see we had no errors, no warnings, and it took about 31 seconds to execute that test. Okay, now if you look inside this log file here, what you're going to see is a detailed list of every transaction that was performed during the course of the test. So we start out by invoking our AQtime, and then we go to the orders menu. We chose family album. Then we entered Barry Allen into a particular text field. Now, if you come down here to the remarks pane, you can see exactly which text field is being typed into. But if you're not someone who's got programming experience and this name doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you, then we've also got pictures of both the application as it appeared at runtime, which is what you see on the right, and what it appeared as at record time, which is here on the left. So never any ambiguity about what a particular test is doing as it runs. So if we had encountered a failure, if one of these actions was marked with a red X instead of that blue check mark, we would be able to just step through the log file, reproduce the error, and then we could export our results just by right-clicking up here and saying export. And that would take our results out, bundle them up as a web page, and we could then attach that to a defect report or to an email, or just share it with somebody else on our team so that they could investigate it further. All right, so that's what you get at Test Complete. But now let's look at what AQtime generated. And what you see here is a list of all the methods that live inside our application. Here, let me flip over to this summary panel first. And what you see here is we've got total coverage by routines. We covered 37.84% of our routines in our application. But down at the line level, well, only 22.46% of that code was actually covered. So we can see there's a long way to go in terms of achieving 100% code coverage. So let's flip back to the report pane here. If you look in the log file, what you're seeing is these items that have the green, yellow, and red marks next to them. Red marks mean that the method wasn't touched at all. Green marks mean that 100% of the code was touched in that instance. And then you got these yellow markers, which mean that the code was partially executed. So maybe there's a case statement in there that wasn't fully executed. And we can actually click on this editor panel down on the bottom of AQtime here and look down at the line level to see exactly which lines of code were and weren't covered. All right, so here we are inside that edit change method that you see up at the top of my screen. And in going through the lines of code, any line that has a green mark next to it is one that was 100% covered. But this guy right here, line 207, he wasn't covered. And you can see here we have an if statement, but the then of that if statement wasn't actually performed. The reason being here is there's a discount algorithm that will be called, and if the user orders more than a certain amount of a product, like if they order 25 of a product, the orders application is set to automatically give them a break on the price, automatically apply a discount to their order. We didn't order enough of that product in order to trigger that discount flag. So as a result, that line didn't get covered. So we know now that we need to create a test case to do that because we know that this line of code hasn't been executed. But now you may be saying, well, Nick, that's good, but what happens if you've got a lot of tests? I mean, chances are you don't have just one test that's going to execute 100% of the lines of code in your application. You know, how does that work? Well, what you can do there, and kind of like what I've done inside of Test Complete, you can see I've got several tests that have been created. And one of them is a test that's going to exercise some edit user functionality. So we'll actually load up a user's order and then make changes to it. I've already run that test with profiling, and you can see right here AQtime has saved those results off. So what I can do now is actually merge those results and combine what I got from the edit order test with the results I just got to get a comprehensive picture and see exactly how much of my code is being covered by the total number of my test cases. All right, so let's do a quick little scenario here. We can see that in our edit order test, we covered this amount of our code. Actually, we covered this amount of our code, 64.86, and then we covered 37.4% of our code with this other test. So what I'm going to do to merge those results is just select them both here in the editor, right-click and say Merge. And now we've got merge routines right here, and we can see that overall we are covering 67.5% of our methods and 59% of our lines. So now we can go through the report panel here and see exactly which code hasn't been executed at 100% and write new test cases around that. So now you know exactly how much of your code is being covered, and that means that when new functionality gets added to a build, AQtime will be able to pinpoint what routines and lines of those routines aren't being tested. That makes it a lot easier to focus your testing efforts, which results in fewer unpleasant surprises for you and your end users. So if you're interested in learning more about Test Complete, I've just pasted a video into the chat window of GoToWebinar. You can watch that video at your leisure. It's about 45 minutes long, covers a lot of Test Complete's capabilities, and can show you how you can make your testing process a lot more effective. Okay, so now we've got automated tests that tell us if our application is behaving properly, and they also generate code coverage information. Let's take this a step further. Wouldn't it be great if, at the touch of a button, you could fetch files out of source control, compile those files, build an executable installer, install that, and then have your automated tests and profiling get kicked off and then notify you if everything ran okay? All right, well, that's where Automated Build Studio comes in. Now, Automated Build Studio is a tool that lets you easily automate all parts of your build and deployment process. Chances are you've got a build engineer on your team, and if you do, buy that person lunch today because their job is hard. In fact, here's a snippet from a build script that I wrote a while back. As you can see, everything inside this script is relying on the command line interface from several different tools. And if you have a complicated or very involved build process, your build engineer may need to know the command line switches for a dozen different applications. Well, Automated Build Studio lets you get all the power of automated builds without the headaches of command line flags. Using our macro builder, you can visually create the actions needed for your build process. So here, let's do one real quick. I'm going to create a new macro. And what I can do at this point is drag and drop any action either from all these palettes that you see over here, or I can search for them. So let's say that I'm using Subversion as a source control system. I'm just going to type Subversion in my operations section here, and I want to check out files from Subversion. I'm just going to drag that operation right onto this list. And then I double-click this, and now I can fill in the blanks here. I can specify my username and my password for my Subversion system. I can put in the URL for my Subversion site, and I can put in the work folder that I want. So now these are all things you'd normally have to specify from the command line, but Automated Build Studio puts a UI around all these things. So instead of having to figure out what -q/5 means, you just fill in your work folder. Click OK. And it's the same process for other actions. Maybe we want to compile a Delphi application. So we'll go to Compile Delphi 2010 project. Again, I'm just going to drag that right on there. Fill in the appropriate blanks. I'll put in the path to my file. I can specify compiler settings. Maybe I want to include debug information, include the local symbols. Yeah, I can set that. Maybe I want my application to be built with runtime packages. I check that box. I don't need to know the switches. I just check the boxes, say OK. And keep going here. Now we've compiled our application. Great. Let's make an install shield out of that. So there's install shield applications for this. You can see right here, here's install shield universal. I'll just drag that right on there. We support a ton of these different types of tools. And again, double click, fill in the blanks. Once the application's built, we want to install it. Okay, so we're going to execute a program. We'll drag that on there. And then once the application's been installed, we want to test it. Okay, then we call test complete 8. And because our test complete project is automatically invoking AQtime to do profiling, we don't need to add any lines here to our macro to do that profiling. All right, but now you're saying, well, that's nice, Nick, but this looks pretty simplistic. How about, can we put logic into this? Like if your tests pass, can we say, send a message out to everybody telling them that the build is ready for QA's consumption? And if it fails, can we send a message off to the developers? Or are we limited to just running these things in sequence? And the answer is no, you can certainly build logic into your tests. In fact, the way we do that is we would say, okay, if there are any errors in our test complete project, we'd want to store that inside of a variable. And then if that error count is greater than 0, for example, we'd want to send the mail out to the developers telling them to fix the build. So here, let's do that. I'm going to double click on the test complete action here. And you can see we've got this result tab. And it's already pre-configured to put the number of errors that were encountered into a variable. So all we have to do is build that variable just by clicking on this drop down here. We click Edit Variables, and then we say Add. And so I'll just call this variable error count. We'll say OK. All right, so now we've got a variable. And so if we encounter errors, or the total number of errors that are detected will be stored inside that error count variable. Now all we have to do is build in some logic here. We have an if-then statement, and we'll just drag that right onto Automated Build Studio. And let's build the condition for that statement. What we'll say here is if, now let's click on this guy here, my variable, my error count, if that's equal to 0, I'm just going to double click on this guy here to bring up my conditional stuff. I'm going to say if it's equal to 0, then that means that we had no failures and the test was successful. So if that's equal to 0, then we're going to send an email. Now let's drag that operation right onto here, and I'm going to indent that as a child of the if-then statement. I did the indent just by clicking on this indent button. And what that means is we will only send this email if the build was successful. So here we can specify some information in there. Here's our message. We'll say that build was successful, and then we'll come in here to the subject and the body of this, and we'll say that build passed and is ready for QA. There you go. All right, QA. There we go. All right, but now if that failed, if the build didn't work, well then we're just going to put an else statement into this, and we'll drag that right on here. And again, I'm just going to copy that send email statement that I already did, paste that in, and we'll edit that. Okay, so now instead of the build was successful, we'll say that the build failed, and that the build, is not ready for QA. Something like that. Okay, and there you go. We've just built that in there. Now you may be saying, well, Nick, this visual logic thing is nice, but really I'd like to do something more sophisticated. I'd like to run some code. Can I do that? And yeah, absolutely. You can create code snippets in any one of 3 languages. We can say you can create code inside of JScript, inside of DelphiScript, or in VBScript. You can just run those things automatically. Now, this example that we've just built, I can't run this because I don't have all these environments installed on my system, but I wanted to show you just how easy it was to build these things out. What I'm going to do right now is shift over to a macro that I've already run previously and show you what it looks like when the results are finished. Now, this macro here is a lot more sophisticated than the one you just saw me do. What this does is it checks to see if our application is already installed, and if it does, it uninstalls it, then it gets the latest versions out of source control, compiles those versions. Here you can see, here's a little script snippet that's being run in JScript. This is being used to increment the version number inside of a particular file. And then that file gets written back into our source control system. So you can write code inside of here, no sweat at all. And then after we create our files inside of Visual Source Safe, then we generate a setup.exe. We run the setup.exe, and if it runs successfully, we send an email. If it fails, we send a different email. And you can see here, if it's successful, we're also doing a few other actions. We're burning those items out to a DVD. And then we can also post files up to an FTP site. And then we can send an email out or an IM out to everybody telling them that the build was successful. So you have a great deal of flexibility here in terms of everything that you can do. So let's take a look at what the results for this particular macro look like. What you're seeing here is a list of every operation that was performed for this particular run. You can see our first line item here is to delete files. And then we check to see if that orders application is already installed, and if it does, uninstall it. And as we perform each one of these actions, you can see how long it took to perform here in the execution time column. So most of these things are only taking a few seconds. In fact, the longest running operation is right here. It's our test complete test, and that takes 1.5 minutes to go through and run all of our tests and profile the results. And then here you can see that if everything was successful, we're going to send the success message, and that's what we've actually done here. We've sent that success message out. There's a few other pieces of information that are being logged here. What you're looking at is the most recent macro run, and then here on the right-hand side of my screen is the previous successful macro run. So if there were failures here, like if our macro that we just ran didn't pass, if there was some problem with it, then we'd see what the macro should have looked like from a previous run. So that's a nice handy way for you to compare how your results are looking. And then up here, you can also see some other information about your application. You can see the time that the macro was started, the configuration it ran on, the system it ran on, who ran it, the total number of operations, etc. All right. So by combining AQtime and Test Complete and Automated Build Studio, you wind up with a start-to-finish package that can automatically build, test, and profile your applications all at the touch of a button. Now, like I said, there are a whole ton of source control systems, compilers, and install tools that Automated Build Studio supports. Additionally, there are other actions like posting things up to FTP sites, sending instant messages, things like that. So you might be scratching your head now and going, well, hey, does it work with my system? What I've just done is pasted a link into the chat panel with a link to a list of supported tools and actions that Automated Build Studio provides. So you can just go ahead, check that link out, see if your system is supported, and go from there. All right, so I'm just going to jump back into some PowerPoint slides here to round things out. As you've seen today, SmartBear provides a lot more than just profiling tools. In addition to build and test and profiling, we also provide peer code review and ALM solutions. So if you like what you've seen today, head on over to smartbear.com and take a look at our other offerings. All right, at this point, let's turn things over to the questions you folks have. I'm going to open up the Q&A panel here. And, okay, it doesn't look like there are any questions at this point in time. Well, what I'm going to do then, folks, is I'm going to paste another link into the chat panel. And that is comparing the differences between AQtime Pro and AQtime Standard. So, we've touched on some of the features that AQtime Pro has that Standard doesn't, such as the ability to export your results, compare your results, merge your results, the different types of profiling counters that are provided when you're doing resource and performance profiling, as well as integration in with some of these other tools. So go ahead, check that out, and you'll get a full list of all the different differences between the two versions and see, if those things would be helpful for you. All right. Still no questions showing up in the log file. At this point, Mike, I guess I'm going to turn things back over to you. So I'd like to thank everybody for their time and attention today. We also have a few other free ALM tools that you can check out at our website. Just head on out to this URL that you see on your screen right now. But Mike, I guess I'm going to turn things back over to you.
Nick, excellent job. Thank you so much. Great information. So we have come to the end of this presentation. For all questions that haven't been answered in this GoToWebinar, you may contact the presenter at support@smartbear.com or Mike Roslog at michael.roslog@embarcadero.com. and I will try to get you an answer to any questions you may have. If you have missed any portion of this presentation, the recorded webinar will be made available within a few days on the events page of the Embarcadero website. On behalf of Embarcadero Technologies and SmartBear Technologies, we thank you for attending today's event and have an awesome rest of the day. Bye-bye, everybody.